Hello, I'm glad to be back sharing with you lessons that I'm learning from reading the book of Deuteronomy. And today I'll share the lessons from Deuteronomy 14 to 16. And chapter 14 opens up with Moses giving the Israelites some new laws and then reiterating some old ones. But the new ones that I noticed were laws regarding mourning, where he told them that they couldn't mourn like the foreigners, basically. So the Lord had instructed concerning also ceremoniously clean and unclean animals. But in Leviticus 21:5, right, we are reminded of the rules of mourning, where they were asked not to shave their beards and their heads and cutting their bodies. Now that's but in Leviticus that was given only to the priests, but here it is now given to everyone, because apparently they were warned not to do that, because though from what I found out, those were pagan acts of mourning. Like when somebody died, they would cut their bodies and shave their heads and all. I think the land that was there, and God was saying, you're different, you're set apart, do not mourn in that way. Moses reminds them of giving of tithe, saying that giving a tenth of their crops, grain, wine, firstborn animals, etc., will teach them to always fear the Lord. He gave alternatives to bringing them to the temple. Back then when they were in the wilderness, in the encampments, they would bring the tithe to the temple. But here, remember that each tribe will be given land that's spread across the region. So some will be far away, but he gave them alternatives to bringing them to God's designated place. And just to reiterate that wherever God's designated place of worship in this land would be wherever the Ark of the Covenant is. So for those who would dwell far from it, he gave an indication to say God will tell them, where to bring it to. They were to bring the entire tithe at the end of every third year to the Levites, the widows, the foreigners, and the orphans, to make sure that they are provided for. God again shows his consideration and mercy for the Israelites' debtors with a law that released them at the end of every seventh year. That's the Jubilee year, if you remember the rules concerning the Jubilee. So every debtor's debt was cancelled during the Jubilee year. He commanded them to be generous to the poor and those in need and share freely with them ungrudgingly. He again calls for the release of Hebrew slaves, also in the Jubilee year, the seventh year, telling them to release slaves with a generous farewell gift. Now, this reminded me of Jacob and Laban, because now, even though Jacob wasn't a slave as such, but he gave himself to Laban to work for him for 7 years for Rachel. But then obviously he got Leah, and so he did it again for another 7 years for Rachel. So for me, I felt like it was this kind of slave. So slavery in loosely put, because remember when Jacob was leaving, Laban ought to have given him lots of gifts and all, but because he was a trickster, and Jacob was a trickster, so Ojoroka, so the Israelites were also reminded to sacrifice the firstborn male animals with no defect. We've heard that before. And Moses goes over the festivals required by God of the Israelites again. Do you remember them? Do you remember the festivals? Well, they had Passover, unleavened bread, the festival of harvest, which was also called the festival of weeks, the festival of shelters, which is also called the festival of booths or of tabernacles. These were the ones he reiterated in this chapter. Moses charged them to appoint for themselves judges and officials to ensure that there was justice among the people. What was your God? What lessons did you learn about God from these chapters? Let me tell you mine. In chapter 16, verse 12, Moses asked the people to remember when they came out of Egypt. That was the point of the Passover. The Exodus was meant to remind them of what God had done and keep them grateful. It was their definition as a people, the Passover. And so as Christians, now this is me just relating it, we should look back at the resurrection So the Passover to the Israelites is what the resurrection is to us as Christians. We need to be reminded of who we are, but we also need to look forward to Christ's coming, to Christ's second coming. And so we should look forward with joy, just as the Israelites did. They were to celebrate their festivals with joy and, with gladness. So God wants us also to be filled with his joy. And so we need to look forward to our own Passover, which is the second coming of Christ, with joy. So all in all, my lesson about God is a God who wants us to be filled with joy. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you're enjoying the book of Deuteronomy as much as I am. And tomorrow I'll be sharing lessons from 17 to 20, and I hope you'll join me. Have a wonderful evening.